The sound of my hand against his face echoed through the entire hall, before I even understood what I had done. Every glass stopped clinking, every voice died. 40 men who carried weapons under their jackets stood frozen, watching their boss touch his own cheek with slow, deliberate fingers. My name is Claire Whitmore, and 3 seconds earlier, I had been standing quietly at the edge of a private party, the way I always did, invisible to everyone who mattered. Then Damon Ashford said something about my late father, that no daughter should ever have to hear in a room full of strangers, and something inside me simply broke. I did not plan it. I did not think about the consequences. My palm moved before my mind caught up with it, and now I stood there, chest rising and falling, staring at the most dangerous man in the city, while his men waited to see how many pieces I would be in by morning. Nobody moved. The band that had been playing soft music in the corner had gone silent mid-note. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, louder than anything else in the room. Damon lowered his hand from his cheek. His jaw was tight, and for one terrible moment, I thought I saw something dark flicker behind his eyes, something that made even his own men take a small step back. I forced myself to hold his gaze. If I was going to face whatever came next, I was not going to do it while looking at the floor. "You have 30 seconds to explain yourself," he said, and his voice was calm, far too calm for a man who had just been struck in front of everyone he commanded. "You don't get 30 seconds, I said. My voice shook, but I kept talking anyway. "You don't get to say my father's name like it means nothing. He was not a coward. He was not weak. He died protecting people, and you have no right to stand here in your expensive suit and pretend you understand anything about sacrifice." A man near the bar shifted his hand toward his jacket. I saw it from the corner of my eye, a small, practiced movement, and my stomach dropped. This was it. This was the moment everything ended. Damon raised 2 fingers, barely lifting his hand off his side, and the man froze instantly. Just like that, with the smallest gesture, 30 armed men stood down. "Nobody touches her," Damon said, and the words landed heavier than any shout could have. I did not understand. My mind scrambled to make sense of it. This was a man known for building his empire on fear, a man whose name alone could clear a street in seconds. I had just humiliated him in front of the very people who followed him, because they believed he was untouchable, and instead of destroying me, he was protecting me. "Why?" I whispered, more to myself than to him. He stepped closer, and every instinct in my body told me to run, but my feet stayed rooted to the marble floor. Up close, I could see a thin scar along his jaw that I had never noticed before, and something about his eyes had changed since I struck him. They were no longer cold, they looked almost tired, almost human. "Because you're the only person in this room who ever had the courage to do that," he said quietly, so only I could hear. I did not know what to say. My hand still stung from the impact, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Around us, the party guests began to whisper. I caught fragments of conversation, disbelief mixed with fear, people trying to understand what they had just witnessed. In this world, striking a man like Damon Ashford was supposed to be a death sentence, not a moment that ended with him standing closer to me instead of further away. A woman in a red dress leaned toward her companion. "She just signed her own end," she murmured, not bothering to lower her voice enough. I flinched at the words, but Damon's expression did not change. He simply turned his head slightly toward the woman, and she went pale and looked away immediately, suddenly very interested in her drink. "Walk with me," Damon said to me. It was not a request. Everyone in the room understood that, including me. But I also understood something else in that moment, something that surprised me more than the slap itself had. I was not afraid of him the way I should have been. I was angry, confused and shaking, but not afraid. I followed him through the crowd, past men who stepped aside like the sea parting, past women who watched me with a mixture of pity and something close to envy. We walked out of the main hall and into a quiet corridor lined with paintings that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. "You could have had me killed," I said once we were alone. "Everyone in that room expected you to." "I know," he said simply. "Then why didn't you?" He turned to face me fully, and for the first time since I had known of him, mostly through whispers and newspaper headlines, he looked almost vulnerable. Because your father saved my life once, a long time ago, before either of us understood what this world would ask of us. I owed him a debt I could never repay, because he never gave me the chance to repay it before he died. The air left my lungs. My father had never mentioned this man, not once, not in all the years I had known him before he was taken from me. "You're lying," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. "I'm not," Damon said. "Ask your brother. He knows part of it, even if he never told you." My brother Leo had always been secretive about our father's final years, deflecting my questions with vague answers and sudden changes of subject. I had assumed it was grief. Now I wondered if it had been something else entirely. "Why did you say those things about him tonight then?" I demanded. "If you owed him so much, why insult his memory in front of everyone?" Something shifted in Damon's expression, guilt flickering across features that were usually unreadable. "Because there are people in that room who cannot know the truth about your father's connection to me. If they knew what he did, what he uncovered, it would put you and your brother in more danger than you can imagine." I said what I said to protect a lie that keeps you both alive. I stared at him, trying to decide if I believed a single word coming out of his mouth. Everything about this night had turned upside down in the span of a few minutes. I had walked into that party as a nobody, invisible, unremarkable, and now I was standing in a private hallway with a man an entire underworld feared, listening to him explain that my father's death was tangled in secrets I never knew existed. "I don't understand any of this," I admitted. "You will," he said, "but not tonight. Tonight, you need to leave through the back entrance, and you need to let people believe I am furious with you. It will keep you safer than the truth would." "And if I refuse to play along?" His eyes hardened slightly. "Then, the people who really killed your father will know exactly where to find his daughter." The words hit me like ice water. My father's death had always been ruled an accident, a car that lost control on a wet road late one night. I had grieved it as senseless tragedy for years. Now this stranger was telling me it had been anything but senseless. "Who killed him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Damon glanced down the corridor, checking for anyone who might be listening. "Not here. Not now. If you want answers, you need to trust me for exactly as long as it takes to get you somewhere safe." Every rational part of my mind screamed that trusting this man was the worst decision I could possibly make. He ran an organization built on violence and control. He had just admitted to lying in front of dozens of witnesses to protect a secret I did not even understand yet. And still, something in the way he looked at me, something in the careful way he had stopped his men from reaching for their weapons, made me hesitate. "Fine," I said. "But if you're lying to me, if any of this is some kind of trick, I will find a way to make you regret it." The corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close to one. "I don't doubt that for a second. You already proved tonight that you're not someone to underestimate." He led me through a side door that opened into a narrow alley behind the building. Cold night air hit my face, a sharp contrast to the warmth and tension of the hall we had left behind. A black car waited at the curb, engine already running, a driver sitting silently behind the wheel. "Get in," Damon said. "My driver will take you somewhere safe for tonight. Tomorrow someone will come explain everything you need to know." "Not you? I have to stay behind and manage what happened in there. If I disappear right after you do, it will raise more questions than we can afford right now." I hesitated at the car door, looking back at him one last time. Why should I trust that this car isn't taking me somewhere far worse than that party? "Because if I wanted you dead," he said quietly, "you would already be dead. A slap in front of my entire organization would have been more than enough reason, if that was what I wanted." The blunt honesty of his answer was somehow more convincing than any promise could have been. I climbed into the car, my mind spinning with questions I did not yet have answers to. As the vehicle pulled away from the curb, I looked back through the rear window and saw Damon standing in the alley, watching until we turned the corner, and he disappeared from view. I did not know it yet, but that single slap, delivered in a moment of grief and fury, had just pulled me into a world my father had spent his final years trying to keep me away from. Somewhere out there, the people responsible for his death were still walking free, and I had just become a target they could not afford to ignore. The car sped through empty streets, carrying me toward answers I was not sure I was ready to hear, and toward a version of my life I never could have imagined 24 hours earlier. The safe house was nothing like I expected. No guards with guns lining the walls, no cold concrete rooms. Instead, I woke up in a bright apartment with tall windows overlooking a quiet street, sunlight spilling across a bed I did not remember falling asleep in. For a moment, I thought the previous night had been a dream. Then I saw the black car keys sitting on the nightstand and heard quiet footsteps in the hallway outside my door, and reality settled back over me like a heavy blanket. I sat up, still wearing the dress from the party, my hair a tangled mess from a restless night. Someone knocked softly on the door. "Miss Whitmore," a voice called. "There is coffee in the kitchen, if you would like some." I recognized the voice as belonging to the driver from the night before, though I had never gotten his name. I pulled myself together as best I could and walked out to find a man in his 40s, calm and unassuming, setting a cup of coffee on the counter. "Where am I?" I asked. "Somewhere safe, exactly as promised," he said. "My name is Elliot. I work for Mr. Ashford." "And when do I get my explanation?" Elliot glanced at his watch. "Soon. He asked me to keep you comfortable until he arrives." I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, grateful for something to hold on to, while my thoughts raced in circles. Every part of me wanted to walk out that door and disappear, to go back to my ordinary life before any of this happened. But another part of me, the part that had slapped a dangerous man in front of an entire room without a second thought, needed to know the truth about my father. An hour later, the front door opened, and Damon walked in wearing a simpler outfit than the tailored suit from the previous night. Without the crowd around him, without the weight of dozens of watching eyes, he looked different, younger somehow, more tired. "You look like you didn't sleep," I said before I could stop myself. "I didn't," he admitted. "There was a lot to manage after you left." "Is everyone in your organization convinced you're furious with me?" "Most of them," he said. "A few are asking questions I don't have easy answers for. That's a problem for another day." He sat down across from me at the small kitchen table, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. I studied his face, searching for any sign of deception, any hint that this was some kind of elaborate manipulation. All I found was exhaustion and something that looked uncomfortably like grief. "Tell me about my father," I finally said. Damon exhaled slowly. "Your father's name was Edmund Whitmore, and to most people, he was a quiet accountant who kept to himself. What most people did not know was that he had spent years working for a private investigator, tracking financial records that connected several powerful families to crimes that never made it into any court of law. My father was an accountant," I said. "He balanced books. He didn't chase criminals." "He balanced books that told a story nobody wanted told," Damon replied. "One of those families belonged to a man named Victor Callahan, someone who has spent the last decade building influence in this city, while staying just far enough removed from anything illegal to avoid consequences. Your father found records connecting Callahan to money that funded very dangerous operations that hurt a lot of innocent people." I felt sick. "And you knew about this?" "I found out about it because your father came to me directly," Damon said. "He knew my organization had reasons of its own to want Callahan exposed. We had lost people because of decisions Callahan made from behind closed doors, decisions that never touched his own hands. Your father offered to share what he found in exchange for protection." "Protection you clearly failed to provide," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Damon's jaw tightened. "I offered him protection. He refused it for himself. He said if he accepted help from someone like me, it would put your family in a different kind of danger, one tied to my world instead of Callahan's. He believed staying independent was safer for you and your brother. So he died anyway," I said quietly, "protecting us from the wrong danger. I believe Callahan found out what your father knew before he could hand over everything he had gathered. I believe the crash that killed him was not an accident." The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in around me. Years of grief I had carefully packed away threatened to break loose all at once. "Why are you telling me this now? Why not before, when I could have done something with the information?" "Because until last night, you were invisible to people like Callahan," Damon said. "You lived quietly, worked an ordinary job, stayed away from anything connected to your father's past. The moment you struck me in front of my entire organization, in front of people who report information to anyone willing to pay for it, you stopped being invisible. The realization hit me hard. My single act of grief-driven fury had not just embarrassed a powerful man. It had pulled me directly into the path of the very danger my father had died trying to keep from my door. "So this is my fault," I whispered. "No," Damon said firmly. "This is Callahan's fault, for building an empire on lies and violence. This is my fault too, for insulting your father's memory tonight, instead of finding a better way to protect the truth. None of this is because you defended someone you loved. I appreciated the words, but they did little to calm the storm inside me. What happens now? Now, we figure out how much danger you're actually in, and we make sure Callahan understands that hurting you would cost him more than he's willing to pay. And how exactly do we do that?" Damon leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. "Your father hid something before he died, a copy of the records he gathered, evidence strong enough to end Callahan's career and possibly send him to prison for the rest of his life. He told me he would keep it somewhere safe, somewhere only someone who truly knew him could find. You think I know where it is? I think you might, without even realizing it." My mind raced back through memories of my father, searching for anything that might hold significance. He had been a careful man, precise in everything he did, the kind of person who left nothing to chance. If he had hidden something important, he would have chosen a place with meaning, somewhere he trusted absolutely. "He used to take me to the old library downtown every Sunday," I said slowly. "There's a reading room on the 3rd floor he loved. He said it was the only place in the city where nobody bothered him." Something flickered in Damon's eyes, a spark of genuine interest. Would he have hidden something there? "I don't know," I admitted, "but it's the only place I can think of that meant enough to him." "Then that's where we start," Damon said, standing up from the table. "But we need to be careful. If Callahan's people are watching for any sign that you know something, a trip to a public library could draw attention we don't want. So what do you suggest?" "We wait until tonight, when the library is closed to the public. I have a contact who can get us inside quietly." The idea of breaking into a building, even with someone experienced beside me, terrified me more than I wanted to admit. But the alternative, sitting in this apartment doing nothing, while the people responsible for my father's death continued living freely, felt far worse. "All right," I said, "tonight." "There's something else you should know," Damon said, his voice softer now. "Your father was not just protecting you and your brother when he refused my help. He was protecting me as well, in his own way." "What do you mean?" "Callahan has spent years trying to find a way to destroy my organization from the inside. If it became known that your father was working with me directly, feeding me information, Callahan would have used that connection to justify moving against my people with everything he had. Your father understood that keeping distance between us protected both sides." I studied him carefully. "You sound like you respected him." "I did," Damon said, without hesitation. "More than most people I've known in this life. He could have walked away the moment he realized what he had found. He could have burned the records and pretended he never saw them. Instead, he spent the last years of his life trying to make things right, even knowing the cost might be everything." "It was everything," I said quietly. "It was him." Damon's expression flickered with something close to pain. "I know. And I have spent every day since wondering if there was something I could have done differently. Some way I could have convinced him to accept protection before it was too late." "Guilt doesn't change anything," I said, echoing words my father used to tell me whenever I dwelled too long on things I could not fix. "No," Damon agreed, "but it does explain why I intend to make sure nothing happens to his daughter, no matter what it costs me." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. I had walked into this apartment prepared to distrust every word out of his mouth, prepared to see him as nothing more than a dangerous man, using my father's memory to manipulate me into cooperation. Instead, I found myself believing him, and that realization unsettled me almost as much as everything else that had happened in the past day. "Why does any of this matter to you personally?" I asked. "You run an organization. You have people to protect, resources to manage, 100 other problems demanding your attention. Why spend your time and risk your safety protecting someone you barely know?" Damon was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on some point beyond me, as though he were seeing something from years ago instead of the room around us. Because your father is the reason I'm still alive to have this conversation with you. Before he ever brought me those records, before any of this started, he pulled me out of a situation that should have killed me. I won't explain the details, not yet, but I owe him a debt that goes beyond business or strategy. Protecting you is the only way I have left to repay it. The weight of his words settled over the small kitchen, and for a moment, the danger surrounding us seemed to fade into the background. I saw, perhaps for the first time, the man beneath the reputation, someone shaped by loss and obligation, just as much as I was. Elliot appeared in the doorway then, his expression tense. "Mr. Ashford, we have a problem." Damon stood immediately, all traces of exhaustion replaced by sharp focus. What kind of problem? Someone matching Callahan's description was seen asking questions near the party venue this morning. "They're asking about the woman who struck you last night." My blood ran cold. "They know about me already?" "It seems so," Elliot said grimly. Damon turned to me, his expression hardening into something protective and dangerous all at once. "Then we don't have until tonight. We move now." The next few minutes passed in a blur of urgency. Elliot gathered a small bag of supplies while Damon made a series of quiet phone calls, his voice low and controlled even as tension radiated from every word. I stood in the middle of the apartment, feeling like a piece on a chessboard being moved by forces far beyond my understanding, and for the first time since the previous night, genuine fear settled into my chest. "Stay close to me," Damon said as we headed toward the door. "Whatever happens, do not wander off on your own. Callahan's people will not hesitate to use you against me if they get the chance." "Why would they use me against you? Yesterday I was nobody to them." "Yesterday you were nobody," Damon agreed. "Today you're the woman who humiliated the most feared man in this city in public and walked away alive. In our world, that makes you either someone worth eliminating or someone worth using as leverage. Either way, you've become far more valuable than you realize." We stepped out into the hallway, and I felt his hand rest briefly against my lower back, guiding me forward with quiet urgency. Despite everything, despite the danger closing in from every direction, I noticed the warmth of that small gesture more than I wanted to admit. Elliot led the way down a back stairwell, checking corners before allowing us to proceed. Every sound made my heart jump. Every shadow felt like a threat waiting to reveal itself. This was not the ordinary life I had known just 24 hours earlier. This was a world of danger and secrets, a world my father had tried desperately to keep me away from. As we reached the ground floor and stepped out into a narrow alley behind the building, I caught sight of a black sedan parked at the far end, engine idling, windows tinted too dark to see inside. "That's not one of ours," Elliot said quietly, his hand moving instinctively toward his jacket. Damon's expression turned to stone. "Get her back inside, now." But it was already too late. The sedan's engine roared to life, tires screeching against pavement as it lurched forward, and I realized with sudden horror that whoever sat inside that car had been waiting for exactly this moment, watching, patient, ready to strike the instant we stepped outside. "Move," Damon shouted, pulling me back toward the door we had just come through. But the alley was narrow, and the car was closing the distance faster than we could retreat. In that heartbeat of pure terror, I understood something with painful clarity. The world I had stumbled into the night before was not going to let me walk away unscathed, no matter how much I wished otherwise. My father had died trying to protect this secret, and now I stood directly in its path, with nowhere left to run. The sedan crashed through a row of trash bins as it swerved into the alley, metal shrieking against the narrow walls on either side. Damon shoved me hard against the building, his body blocking mine, as the vehicle skidded to a stop only feet away, doors flying open before it had fully halted. Two men in dark clothing spilled out, moving with the kind of speed that told me this was not their first time doing something like this. Elliot moved between us, and the threat instantly, his hand finally closing around whatever weapon he carried beneath his jacket. "Whitmore," one of the men called out, his eyes locked on me with unsettling focus. "Mr. Callahan would like a word." "She's not going anywhere," Damon said, stepping forward, his voice carrying an authority that made even these strangers hesitate for half a second. "This doesn't concern you, Ashford," the second man said. "Hand her over, and we forget you were ever involved." "That's not going to happen," The first man's hand moved, and everything happened at once. Elliot fired a warning shot into the pavement between them, the sound cracking through the alley like thunder, sending both men diving for cover. Damon grabbed my arm and pulled me hard toward the door we had just exited, shouting something to Elliot that I could not process through the roaring in my ears. We burst back into the stairwell, Damon slamming the door shut behind us and throwing the deadbolt just as something heavy struck it from the other side. "That won't hold long," he said, already moving, pulling me up the stairs instead of down. "We need another way out." My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, carrying me upward on pure adrenaline, while my mind struggled to catch up with everything unfolding around me. Just yesterday, my biggest concern had been an overdue report at my ordinary office job. Now I was running from armed men through a stairwell, my father's secrets unraveling faster than I could process them. "Who were they?" I gasped as we climbed. "Callahan's people, which means he already knows exactly where you were staying, which means someone talked." The implication hit me hard. "Someone in your organization?" "Possibly," Damon said grimly. "Or someone watching this building, who recognized you from last night. Either way, we can't go back to that apartment." We reached the roof access door, and Damon kicked it open with practiced efficiency. Cold wind hit us as we stepped out onto the flat rooftop, the city stretching out around us in every direction, indifferent to the danger closing in below. "There's a fire escape on the north side," Damon said, already moving. "It leads down to a service road where a car should be waiting." "Should be." I called ahead while we were running. "If Elliot managed to hold them off long enough, someone will be there." We crossed the rooftop quickly, the sounds of shouting and another gunshot echoing up from the alley below. I tried not to think about Elliot, tried not to imagine what might be happening to the man who had made me coffee just that morning, and treated me with quiet kindness, despite everything happening around us. The fire escape rattled under our weight as we descended, metal groaning with each step. Halfway down, I glanced back and saw a figure appear on the rooftop above us, silhouetted against the gray sky, watching our descent with cold patience. "Faster," Damon said, seeing the same thing I had. We hit the ground running, and true to Damon's word, a dark car waited at the end of the service road, engine already running. A woman I did not recognize sat behind the wheel, her expression tense but focused. "Get in," she said the moment we approached. "We need to move now." I climbed into the back seat with Damon right behind me, and the car lurched forward before the doors had fully closed. Through the rear window, I watched the building shrink behind us, half expecting to see the sedan from the alley in pursuit, but the streets behind us remained empty. "Where's Elliot?" Damon asked the driver, his voice tight with concern. "He got out through the front entrance right after you two went up," she said. "He's meeting us at the second location." Relief washed over me, though it did little to calm the shaking in my hands. Damon noticed, and without a word, he reached over and gently took my hand in his, steadying it with a firm, warm grip that somehow made the panic feel slightly more manageable. "You're safe," he said quietly, "for now." "For now" doesn't feel very reassuring. "I know," he admitted, "but it's the truth, and I'm not going to lie to you about how dangerous this situation is. Callahan wouldn't send men after you unless he believed you actually knew something valuable." "I don't know anything," I said. "I don't even remember my father mentioning a hidden location for anything important." "You mentioned the library," Damon reminded me. "That might be more than you realize." We drove in tense silence for several minutes, the driver taking sharp turns down unfamiliar streets, clearly working to lose any possible pursuit. Eventually, the car pulled into an underground parking garage beneath an unremarkable office building, and we made our way up a service elevator to a floor that looked like nothing more than empty storage space. Elliot was already there when we arrived, a small bandage wrapped around his forearm, his expression grim but alert. "You're hurt," I said, rushing toward him without thinking. "It's nothing," he said, though the tightness in his voice suggested otherwise. "A graze, that's all. I've had worse." "Report," Damon said, his tone shifting into something more businesslike, though concern still lingered beneath the surface. "They knew exactly which apartment to hit," Elliot said. "That wasn't luck or surveillance. Someone gave them the address." Damon's expression darkened considerably. "Who else knew we were there?" You, me, and the two people who prepared the location this morning, Elliot said. I trust both of them completely, but that leaves very few possibilities. Unless someone was followed without realizing it, the driver, whose name I still did not know, offered from where she stood near the door. Possible, Damon acknowledged, but we can't rule out a leak inside the organization either, not after everything else that's happened. I watched the tension between them, realizing for the first time just how fragile trust was within Damon's world. Everyone around him existed in a constant state of careful suspicion, always calculating who might betray them next. It was exhausting just to witness, let alone live within. What do we do now? I asked. Damon turned to face me fully. Now, we accelerate our plans. We can't wait until tonight for the library. Callahan already knows you're a target worth pursuing aggressively, which means every hour we delay gives him more opportunity to anticipate our next move. So we go now? In broad daylight? We go disguised, and we go carefully, Damon said. Elliot will scout the location first. Make sure it's clear. If your father hid something there, we need to find it before Callahan's people think to search the same place. The plan felt reckless, but I understood there was no safer alternative available to us. Sitting still meant waiting for Callahan's people to find another opening, another moment of vulnerability to exploit. Moving forward, however dangerous, at least gave us a chance to control our own fate. An hour later, dressed in clothes provided by the mysterious driver, whose name I finally learned was Nora, I found myself walking toward the old library downtown, my heart pounding with every step. Damon walked beside me, dressed casually enough to blend into the afternoon crowd, though I noticed his eyes constantly scanning our surroundings, alert to any sign of danger. Third floor reading room, I said as we entered the building, memories of childhood Sundays flooding back unexpectedly. My father had always chosen the same corner table, always ordered the same quiet ritual of reading side by side, without speaking for hours at a time. We climbed the stairs slowly, trying to appear like ordinary visitors, rather than people searching for hidden secrets. The reading room looked exactly as I remembered it, rows of tall shelves and worn wooden tables, illuminated by soft afternoon light filtering through arched windows. Where did he usually sit? Damon asked quietly. I led him toward the corner table near the back, memories washing over me with painful clarity. I could almost see my father there, glasses perched on his nose, a book open in front of him while I sat across from him with my own. Here, I said. This was always his spot. We searched the area carefully, checking beneath the table, examining the surrounding shelves for anything out of place. My hands trembled as I ran them along the underside of the table, searching for something, anything, that might hold significance. There's nothing here, I said after several minutes, frustration creeping into my voice. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this isn't the place. Damon knelt down, examining the wooden panel at the base of the shelf beside us. Wait, he said. Look at this. I crouched beside him and saw what had caught his attention, a small section of the wooden panel that appeared slightly different from the rest, as though it had been carefully removed and reattached at some point. Help me, Damon said, working his fingers along the edge, until the panel came loose in his hands, revealing a hollow space behind it. Inside, wrapped carefully in plastic to protect it from moisture, sat a thick envelope, sealed and untouched, exactly where my father had left it years ago. My hands shook as I reached for it, pulling it free from its hiding place. For a long moment, I simply held it, overwhelmed by the weight of what it represented. The final piece of my father's legacy, hidden away in the one place he trusted enough to keep it safe. This is it, I whispered. This is what he left behind. Damon's expression was unreadable as he watched me hold the envelope, something between relief and apprehension flickering across his features. We need to get out of here before anyone realizes what we found. But as we stood to leave, a familiar figure stepped out from between the rows of shelves, blocking our path to the exit. I recognized him immediately from photographs I had seen in old newspaper articles about my father's case, the same cold eyes and calculated expression that had haunted the edges of my nightmares for years, without my ever fully understanding why. Victor Callahan stood before us, flanked by two men I recognized from the alley, his expression carrying none of the surprise I expected. Instead, he looked almost pleased, as though everything unfolding before him was proceeding exactly according to plan. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice smooth and unsettling. "Your father spent years trying to keep that envelope out of my hands. I have to admit, I did not expect his daughter to lead me directly to it." My blood ran cold. Everything we had done, every careful precaution, every desperate effort to stay ahead of danger, had somehow still led us directly into a trap. "Give me the envelope," Callahan continued, "and perhaps I'll consider letting you both walk out of here alive." Damon stepped slightly in front of me, his posture shifting into something coiled and dangerous. "That's not going to happen, Callahan." "I had a feeling you would say that," Callahan said, almost amused, "which is why I brought insurance." He gestured toward the entrance of the reading room, and my heart stopped completely as another figure was pushed forward into view, hands bound. A look of fear and apology etched across a face I knew better than almost anyone else in the world. "Leo?" I gasped, staring at my brother, held captive by men who clearly had no intention of showing mercy to either of us if we failed to cooperate. "I'm sorry," Leo said, his voice breaking. "They found me an hour ago. I didn't have a choice." Callahan's smile widened, cold and triumphant. "Now then," he said, turning his attention back to the envelope clutched tightly in my hands. "Let's discuss exactly how this is going to work." "Let my brother go first," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Then we talk." "You're not in a position to make demands, Miss Whitmore," Callahan said, taking a slow step closer. "Your father made that mistake once, thinking he could bargain from a position of weakness. I would have thought his daughter might learn from his example." "My father never once bargained with you," I shot back. "He kept you guessing for years. He hid what he found so well that you're still standing here, years later, desperate enough to threaten a family, instead of simply taking what you want." Something flickered across Callahan's face, a brief crack in his composed exterior, and I realized my words had struck closer to truth than I expected. He was desperate. Whatever sat inside that envelope mattered enough that he was willing to risk exposure, willing to threaten 2 lives in a public building in broad daylight, just to secure it. "Careful," Damon murmured beside me, low enough that only I could hear. Callahan's men shifted their grip on Leo, and my brother winced, his eyes pleading with me silently. I felt Damon's hand brush against mine, a silent signal, though I could not yet guess what he intended. "Here's what's going to happen," Callahan said, his composure returning. "You hand the envelope to one of my men. In exchange, your brother walks free, and you and Mr. Ashford are permitted to leave this building without further incident. Refuse, and I promise you, the outcome will be far less pleasant for everyone involved." "How do we know you'll actually let him go?" I asked. "How do we know you won't just take the envelope and hurt him anyway?" "You don't," Callahan admitted with unsettling honesty. "But consider the alternative. Right now, you have leverage. The moment that envelope changes hands, you lose it entirely. I would think carefully before deciding how quickly to give that away." Damon's grip on my hand tightened slightly, and I understood the message without him needing to speak it aloud. He was stalling, buying time, waiting for an opportunity that had not yet presented itself. "What exactly is in this envelope that has you so desperate?" Damon asked, his tone almost conversational despite the danger surrounding us. "Enough to risk exposing yourself like this, in a public building, with witnesses who could walk through that door at any moment?" Callahan's jaw tightened. "That is none of your concern, Ashford." "I think it is," Damon pressed, "because a man as careful as you, a man who has spent a decade staying just far enough from every crime to avoid consequences, does not suddenly abandon that caution unless he's genuinely afraid of what happens if this information becomes public." "You're stalling," Callahan said, his patience visibly thinning. "Maybe I am," Damon replied, "or maybe I'm simply curious what could possibly frighten a man who has spent years believing himself untouchable." One of Callahan's men shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward his employer with something that looked almost like uncertainty. I noticed it immediately, a small crack in the unified front Callahan had presented, and I wondered how much these men actually knew about what they were protecting. "Enough," Callahan snapped. "The envelope, Miss Whitmore, now." I looked down at the envelope in my hands, feeling the weight of everything it represented pressing against my palms. My father had died protecting whatever information sat inside these pages. Handing it over now, even to save my brother, felt like betraying everything he had sacrificed to keep hidden. But looking at Leo, at the fear etched across his familiar face, at the desperate hope in his eyes, I knew I could not let him pay the price for my father's secrets either. "Okay," I said quietly, taking a step forward. "You'll get your envelope." "Claire, wait," Damon said, tension coiling through his voice. "I don't have a choice," I said, not looking back at him, keeping my focus locked on Callahan and my brother. "I'm not losing him too." I took another step forward, closing the distance between myself and the nearest of Callahan's men. The envelope extended slightly in my trembling hand. The room felt impossibly silent, every breath held, every eye locked on the small exchange about to take place. Just as my fingers began to loosen their grip on the envelope, a sudden crash echoed from the stairwell behind us, followed immediately by shouting voices and the unmistakable sound of multiple people moving quickly through the building. Callahan's men startled, momentarily distracted, their attention split between me and the growing commotion. It was the opening Damon had been waiting for. He moved with startling speed, closing the distance to the man holding Leo before anyone could react, his hand striking the man's wrist with precise force that sent the weapon clattering to the floor. Leo stumbled free, and I rushed forward instinctively, pulling my brother away from the chaos erupting around us. Callahan shouted orders, his composed exterior finally shattering as the situation spiraled beyond his control. More footsteps thundered up the stairwell, and I caught sight of Elliot and Nora bursting into the reading room, weapons raised, expressions fierce with determination. "Get them out," Damon shouted, still grappling with one of Callahan's remaining men. Elliot moved immediately, guiding Leo and me toward a side exit, while Nora provided cover, her focus unwavering, despite the chaos surrounding us. I glanced back once, catching sight of Damon locked in a tense standoff with Callahan himself, the two men separated by only a few feet of empty space, years of history and animosity radiating between them. "Come on," Elliot urged, pulling my attention back toward escape. "He can handle himself. Right now, my job is getting you two somewhere safe." I hesitated only a moment longer, torn between the instinct to help and the responsibility to protect my brother, before allowing Elliot to guide us out of the reading room and down a service corridor I never knew existed. Behind us, the sounds of struggle continued, fading slowly as we put distance between ourselves and the confrontation still unfolding. Whatever happened next in that reading room would determine far more than just our immediate safety. It would determine whether my father's sacrifice had meant something, or whether Callahan would finally succeed in burying the truth forever, along with anyone who dared to stand in his way. Leo would not stop shaking as Elliot led us through a maze of narrow hallways deep beneath the library, his hands still trembling from the ropes that had bound them only minutes before. I kept a firm grip on his arm, partly to reassure him, partly to reassure myself that this was real, that he was actually safe. "I didn't tell them anything," Leo said suddenly, his voice hoarse. "Whatever they think I said, I didn't tell them where you were staying." "I know," I said, though privately I wondered how Callahan's men had found the apartment so quickly if not through my brother. "They grabbed me outside my building this morning," Leo continued, desperate to explain himself. "I was heading to work, and suddenly there were men on either side of me. They knew things about our family, about Dad, things I never told anyone." Elliot glanced back at us, his expression thoughtful. "That's useful information," he said. "If they knew things about your family history, they've likely had someone watching you for longer than just today." The thought sent a fresh wave of unease through me. If Callahan's people had been monitoring Leo for an extended period, it meant our family had been under surveillance long before I ever struck Damon at that party. The slap had not created this danger. It had simply accelerated something already in motion. We emerged from the service corridor into an underground parking structure, where Nora waited beside a different vehicle than the one we had used earlier. She looked tense, her eyes constantly scanning the shadows around us. "Get in," she said. "We need to move before Callahan regroups." "What about Damon?" I asked, refusing to move until I had an answer. "He told us to get you and your brother somewhere safe first," Nora said. "He'll meet us once he's certain we're not being followed." The uncertainty gnawed at me as we climbed into the car, Leo settling beside me, still pale and shaken from his ordeal. I clutched the envelope tightly in my lap, the weight of its contents pressing down on me with every passing second. "What is that?" Leo asked, noticing the envelope for the first time. "Answers," I said quietly, "about what really happened to Dad." Leo's expression shifted, grief and anger mixing together as understanding dawned across his features. "You mean his death wasn't an accident?" "No," I said. "I don't think it was." We drove in tense silence for nearly 20 minutes, Nora taking a circuitous route through the city, designed to shake any potential pursuers. Eventually, we arrived at a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of town, far removed from the polished apartment we had stayed in previously. Inside, the space had been converted into a functional operations center, monitors lining one wall, several people moving quietly between stations with focused efficiency. This was clearly not just a hiding place. This was the heart of Damon's organization, a place I never expected to be allowed to see. "Wait here," Nora said, guiding Leo and me toward a small side room. "Someone will bring you food and something to drink. Try to rest, if you can." The moment the door closed behind her, Leo turned to me, his composure finally cracking. "Claire, what have you gotten us into?" "I didn't ask for any of this," I said defensively, though guilt gnawed at me regardless. "I struck a man at a party because he insulted Dad's memory. I never expected it to lead here." "You struck Damon Ashford," Leo said, disbelief coloring his voice. "In front of his entire organization. Do you have any idea how insane that sounds?" "I know how it sounds," I said, "but it's what happened, and now we're both tangled up in something Dad spent years trying to protect us from." Leo sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair. "I always knew there was something he wasn't telling us. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way he'd change the subject whenever I asked about his work. I just never imagined it was something like this." "Did you know about Damon before all this?" I asked. "Not directly," Leo admitted. "But a few months before Dad died, I overheard him on the phone, talking about needing protection, about trusting someone who understood the kind of danger he was facing. I never knew who he meant." The pieces continued falling into place, painting a picture of our father that neither of us had fully understood while he was alive. A man caught between duty and danger, trying desperately to shield his children from a truth that could destroy them. The door opened, and Damon entered, looking worn but unharmed, a small cut above his eyebrow, the only visible sign of the confrontation he had just survived. Relief flooded through me at the sight of him, stronger than I expected or wanted to admit. "You're all right," I said, standing quickly. "Bruised, but all right," he confirmed. "Callahan managed to escape during the chaos, unfortunately, but his men were left behind. We have information now that we didn't have before." "What kind of information?" Leo asked, standing as well, some of his earlier fear replaced by cautious curiosity. "Names," Damon said. "People within Callahan's network who might be willing to talk if approached correctly. It's not everything, but it's a start." I held up the envelope still clutched in my hands. "And this. Whatever's inside this envelope might be the key to ending this permanently." Damon's expression turned serious. "Have you opened it?" "Not yet," I admitted. "I wanted to wait until we were somewhere safe." "We're as safe as we're likely to get right now," Damon said, "if you're ready." My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal on the envelope, years of careful preservation finally giving way beneath my fingers. Inside, I found dozens of pages, financial records, bank statements, handwritten notes in my father's familiar handwriting, all meticulously organized and cross-referenced. Leo leaned over my shoulder, scanning the documents with growing disbelief. "This is extensive," he murmured. "Dad built an entire case against Callahan." Damon studied the pages carefully, his expression growing increasingly serious as he absorbed the implications of what we had found. "This is more than enough to bring formal charges, if it reaches the right people. Money laundering, connections to organized violence, falsified records spanning years. Callahan has been building his empire on a foundation of lies, and your father documented every piece of it. So we take this to the police," Leo said. "We expose him publicly." "It's not that simple," Damon said. Callahan has connections within the police department, within the local government. If we hand this over to the wrong people, it could disappear entirely, or worse, it could put all of us in even greater danger. Then what do we do? I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. We can't just sit on this evidence forever, hoping the danger eventually goes away. Damon was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing options carefully. There's a journalist I trust, someone who has covered organized crime in this city for years, without ever compromising her sources or her integrity. If we bring this to her, publicly, in a way that makes it impossible for Callahan's connections to suppress the story, it might be our best chance at real justice. And if that doesn't work, Leo asked, then we find another way, Damon said firmly. But this is a start, and it's more progress than your father managed to make alone in years of careful investigation. The plan felt daunting, but for the first time since the chaos began, I felt a flicker of genuine hope. My father's sacrifice had not been in vain. The truth he died protecting finally had a chance to see the light of day, and perhaps, in doing so, could prevent anyone else from suffering the same fate he had. There's something else, Damon said, his tone shifting slightly. While we were dealing with Callahan, my people back at the main compound uncovered something troubling. Someone within my organization has been in contact with Callahan's people for weeks. My stomach dropped. A traitor. It appears so, Damon confirmed, which explains how Callahan knew where you were staying this morning. Leo's expression darkened. Do you know who it is? Not yet, Damon said. But I intend to find out, and when I do, they will face consequences for endangering people under my protection. The revelation added another layer of complexity to an already precarious situation. Not only were we facing an external threat from Callahan, but internal betrayal threatened to undermine any progress we managed to make. I studied Damon's face, searching for any sign of doubt or hesitation, but found only quiet, controlled determination. How do we know we can trust anyone here? I asked, gesturing toward the operations center beyond the closed door. If someone inside your own organization is working against you, how do we know we're actually safe right now? You don't? Not completely, Damon admitted, his honesty striking me as it had before. But I trust the people in this building with my life, and I have for years. Whoever betrayed us is likely someone with access to information, but not necessarily physical presence here. We'll find them. Elliot appeared in the doorway then, his expression grim. Sir, we have a location on the traitor. Security footage from this morning shows someone accessing the safe house address through an internal terminal shortly before Callahan's men arrived. Who? Damon asked, his voice hardening. Elliot hesitated, glancing briefly toward me before answering. It was Victor. He's been with the organization for 6 years. Damon's expression turned to stone, betrayal and fury warring beneath a carefully controlled exterior. Victor, he repeated quietly, as though testing the name for some hidden explanation that might make sense of the impossible. He's requesting a meeting, Elliot continued. Says he wants to explain himself before you make any decisions. Bring him in, Damon said, his voice cold and final. It's time we understood exactly how deep this betrayal runs, and exactly what it's going to cost him. I watched Damon straighten his shoulders, preparing himself for a confrontation that promised to reveal secrets far more personal and painful than anything Callahan himself had managed to uncover. Whatever happened next would determine not just our safety, but the very foundation of trust that held Damon's entire organization together. Minutes later, 2 guards escorted a man into the operations center, his hands bound loosely in front of him, his head lowered in a posture that looked more like shame than defiance. Victor was younger than I expected, perhaps in his early 30s, with tired eyes that refused to meet Damon's gaze as he was brought forward. Explain, Damon said, his voice flat and controlled, though I could sense the effort it took him to keep it that way. Victor lifted his head slowly. They have my sister, he said, his voice cracking. Callahan's men took her 3 weeks ago. They said if I didn't cooperate, if I didn't feed them information, they would hurt her. The room went quiet, the weight of his confession settling over everyone present. I glanced at Leo, seeing my own conflicted emotions mirrored on his face, sympathy warring with the memory of how close his betrayal had come to costing us everything. Why didn't you come to me? Damon asked, something raw beneath his controlled exterior. You know I would have helped. You know this organization protects its own. I was afraid, Victor admitted. Afraid that if I told you, they would kill her before you could do anything. Callahan made it very clear what would happen if I involved anyone else. So instead, you gave him the address of a safe house with an innocent woman inside, Damon said, his voice hardening again. You put Claire's life at risk, and her brother's, to protect your sister. I know, Victor said, tears now visible in his eyes. I know what I did was wrong. I've hated myself every single day since they first contacted me, but I didn't know what else to do. She's the only family I have left. I found myself stepping forward, despite the danger this man had put me in, only hours earlier. Where is she being held? Victor looked at me, surprised by the question. I don't know exactly. Somewhere on the east side, based on things I overheard during the calls. They never let me see her directly, only sent proof that she was still alive. Damon studied Victor for a long moment, clearly wrestling with competing instincts, the need to enforce consequences for betrayal, warring against understanding for the desperation that had driven it. You should have trusted me, he finally said. That trust goes both ways in this organization, and you broke it the moment you chose secrecy over honesty. I know, Victor repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm ready to accept whatever punishment you decide is fair. Your punishment, Damon said slowly, is helping us get her back safely, and then living with the knowledge that your silence nearly cost innocent lives. After that, we'll discuss your future within this organization, if you still have one. Relief and disbelief flickered across Victor's face in equal measure, as though he had expected far harsher consequences than the chance to make things right. Thank you, he said. I'll do whatever it takes. Elliot, Damon said, turning to his second in command. Get everything Victor knows about the location, the timing of the calls, any details that might help us narrow down where they're keeping his sister. We move on this immediately. As Elliot led Victor toward another room to begin the debriefing, I found myself standing beside Damon, watching the controlled chaos of his organization shifting into a new phase of urgent planning. Screens lit up with maps and surveillance photos, voices low and focused, as pieces began falling into place. You didn't have to show him mercy, I said quietly, after everything he did. Mercy isn't weakness, Damon said, echoing something that felt deeply personal beneath the simple words. Sometimes understanding why someone breaks is more valuable than simply punishing them for breaking. Victor made a mistake, born of fear and love, not greed or malice. That distinction matters. I thought of my father then, of the impossible choices he must have faced trying to protect his family while uncovering the truth about Callahan. Perhaps everyone caught in this world eventually faced moments where love and fear pushed them toward decisions they never imagined themselves capable of making. What happens now? I asked. Now, we rescue an innocent woman from Callahan's people. We expose the evidence your father spent years gathering, and we make sure Callahan finally faces consequences for everything he's done, Damon said. It won't be easy, and it won't be without risk. But we're closer to ending this than we've ever been before. Leo joined us then, having overheard the last part of our conversation. Count me in, he said. Whatever needs to be done, I want to help. Damon studied my brother for a moment, something like respect flickering across his expression. Then let's get to work. We don't have much time before Callahan realizes exactly how much ground he's lost today and moves to protect whatever he has left. The operations center buzzed with renewed energy around us, every person moving with purpose toward a single shared goal. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, I felt something other than fear settling into my chest. It was determination, sharp and unwavering, the same quality that had driven my father to risk everything for the truth, now burning steadily within me as well. The warehouse Callahan used to hold Victor's sister sat at the edge of the industrial district, surrounded by chain-link fencing and security cameras that Damon's people had already found ways to bypass. I stood in the back of a surveillance van with Leo beside me, watching monitors that displayed grainy footage of the building's exterior, my heart pounding with anticipation. 2 guards visible at the front entrance, Nora reported through the radio, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. Possibly more inside. We won't know for certain until we breach. Elliot's status, Damon said, his voice cutting through the static. In position, Elliot replied. Ready when you are. I gripped the edge of the console in front of me, wishing desperately that I could do something more than watch from a distance. Victor sat nearby, his expression a mixture of hope and terror, waiting to learn whether his sister would finally be freed after weeks of captivity. You should have let me go with them, Leo said quietly, echoing my own frustration. Damon said we'd be more useful here. Coordinating information, I reminded him, though the words felt hollow given how helpless I actually felt. On the monitor, I watched shadows move carefully around the perimeter of the warehouse, Damon's people executing a plan they had spent the last several hours refining. My breath caught as the first guard was subdued silently, disappearing from view without any visible struggle. First obstacle clear, came a whispered report, moving to secondary entrance. The minutes stretched agonizingly slow as the operation unfolded, each report bringing fresh tension mixed with cautious relief. I thought about my father throughout the waiting, wondering if he had ever found himself in similarly desperate situations during his years of quiet investigation, forced to trust others with matters of life and death, while feeling powerless to influence the outcome himself. We're inside, Damon's voice reported eventually. Clearing rooms now. Silence followed, broken only by static and the occasional muffled sound that might have been movement or struggle. Victor leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together, praying silently for news that would confirm his sister's safety. Found her, Elliot's voice finally broke through, relief evident even through the radio's distortion. She's alive, frightened, but alive. The tension in the van broke instantly, Victor collapsing into a chair with tears streaming down his face, overwhelming relief replacing weeks of desperate fear. I felt my own eyes stinging, moved by the raw emotion of a reunion I had helped make possible, even from this distance. Callahan, I said suddenly, remembering the man who had orchestrated all of this suffering. Was he there? A pause followed my question, longer than I liked. Negative, Damon finally replied. He wasn't present. We have his men in custody, but Callahan himself is still out there. Disappointment mixed with continued anxiety settled over me. Rescuing Victor's sister was a genuine victory, but it did nothing to address the larger threat still looming over all of us. Callahan remained free, presumably furious over the setbacks he had suffered throughout the day, likely more dangerous now than ever before. We regrouped back at the warehouse operations center an hour later. Victor's sister safely delivered to medical care, her condition stable, despite the ordeal she had endured. Victor thanked each of us individually, his gratitude overwhelming and sincere, before disappearing to be by his sister's side. What now? I asked Damon, once the immediate celebration had settled into more serious planning. Now, we move forward with exposing Callahan publicly, Damon said. The journalist I mentioned earlier, her name is Vivian Hartley. I've already reached out. She's agreed to meet with us tonight to review the evidence your father gathered. Is that safe? Leo asked. Meeting in public after everything that's happened today? We won't be meeting in public, Damon clarified. She'll come here, to a location Callahan doesn't know exists. If the evidence is as strong as it appears, she can begin preparing her story immediately, with protections in place, to ensure it can't simply be buried once it goes to print. The plan felt like our best chance at finally ending the danger that had consumed our lives over the past day, though uncertainty still gnawed at the edges of my confidence. Callahan remained free, unpredictable, and increasingly desperate. There was no guarantee he would simply accept defeat without one final, dangerous attempt to protect himself. Vivian Hartley arrived that evening, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, whose reputation for uncompromising journalism preceded her considerably. She reviewed the documents from my father's envelope with careful, methodical attention, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed years of experience investigating exactly this kind of corruption. This is remarkable work, she said finally, looking up from the pages spread across the table before her. Your father was extremely thorough. This isn't just enough to embarrass Callahan. This is enough to end him completely, assuming it holds up under the scrutiny it's about to receive. How long before you can publish? Damon asked. Given the sensitivity, I'll need a few days to verify sources and ensure everything is airtight before we go to print, Vivian said. But I can promise you this, Once this story breaks, Callahan's carefully constructed reputation will not survive it. Relief flooded through me, mixed with lingering anxiety about what those next few days might hold. If Callahan learned that his downfall was imminent, there was no telling what desperate measures he might attempt in response. That night, exhausted beyond anything I had ever experienced, I found myself sitting alone on the warehouse rooftop, staring out at the city lights spread beneath a clear evening sky. The events of the past day replayed endlessly in my mind, an overwhelming collision of grief, fear, and unexpected discovery that had reshaped everything I thought I understood about my life and my father's memory. Footsteps approached from behind, and I did not need to turn around to know it was Damon joining me. "Couldn't sleep either," he said, settling down beside me on the rooftop ledge. "Too much to process," I admitted. "Yesterday, my biggest worry was whether I'd finish a report on time for work. Now I'm sitting on a rooftop after helping rescue a hostage and expose a criminal empire." "Life has a way of changing everything in an instant," Damon said quietly. "Trust me, I understand that better than most people." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the city humming quietly beneath us, distant and unaware of everything that had unfolded that day. I found myself studying his profile in the moonlight, noticing again the weariness etched into his features, the weight of responsibility he carried that few people ever fully understood. "Can I ask you something?" I said eventually. "Of course." "Why did you really protect me last night? The real reason, not just the debt you owed my father." Damon was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. "Because the moment you struck me in front of everyone, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine courage, unafraid of consequences, driven by something more important than self-preservation. I've spent so long surrounded by people who calculate every move based on fear or ambition. You reminded me that some things are worth risking everything for." His words settled over me, unexpectedly warm, despite everything dangerous surrounding our situation. "I didn't think about consequences at all in that moment," I admitted. "I just couldn't let him disrespect my father's memory." "That's exactly what made it powerful," Damon said. "Most people in that room have spent years learning to suppress exactly that kind of honest reaction. You reminded everyone what genuine conviction looks like, myself included." I felt something shift between us in that quiet moment, something I had been carefully avoiding acknowledging throughout the chaos of the day. Despite everything, despite the danger and uncertainty still surrounding us, I found myself drawn to this complicated, guarded man in ways I never expected when I first struck him across the face. "What happens after this is over?" I asked. "After Callahan is exposed, after the danger passes, what happens to us?" Damon turned to look at me fully, something vulnerable flickering behind his usually guarded expression. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've spent so long focused on survival and obligation that I'm not entirely sure how to imagine a future beyond simply managing the next crisis." "That's not much of an answer," I said, though I understood the honesty behind his hesitation. "No," he agreed, "but it's the truth. What I do know is that I don't want whatever this is between us to end simply because the immediate danger passes. You've changed something in me that I thought had been permanently buried." Before I could respond, Elliot's voice crackled through a radio clipped to Damon's belt, urgent and tense. "Sir, we have a situation. Callahan just released a statement to local media, claiming Ashford's organization kidnapped him and is holding him against his will. He's turning this into a public narrative before we can even publish the evidence." Damon's expression hardened instantly, the vulnerable moment between us replaced by sharp, calculating focus. "That's not possible. We don't have him in custody." "I know," Elliot said. "But he's making it sound like we do, painting himself as a victim while simultaneously discrediting anything Vivian eventually publishes. If people believe he's currently being held against his will by dangerous criminals, any evidence against him will look like coerced fabrication." The clever desperation of the move struck me immediately. Callahan was not simply running from justice, he was actively working to control the narrative, positioning himself as a sympathetic victim before the truth could ever reach the public in a credible form. "We need to respond immediately," Damon said, already standing, his focus completely shifted toward this new crisis. "Get Vivian on the phone. We need to publish something now. even a preliminary statement, before Callahan's version takes hold. We rushed back down into the operations center, the calm of the previous hour replaced entirely by urgent activity. Vivian answered immediately, already aware of Callahan's public statement, her professional instincts sharpening in response to the unfolding crisis. "I can release a preliminary piece within the hour," she said through the speakerphone. "It won't have every detail verified, but it will establish enough credible doubt about Callahan's claims to prevent his narrative from taking complete hold." "Do it," Damon said. "We can't let him control this story." The next hour passed in a blur of activity, phone calls, careful wording, and anxious waiting, as Vivian's team worked to publish something substantial enough to counter Callahan's manipulation. I watched Damon coordinate everything, with practiced efficiency, impressed, despite the chaos, by how calmly he navigated crisis after crisis, without ever losing his composure entirely. When Vivian's preliminary story finally went live, I felt a strange mixture of relief and continued anxiety. The article carefully outlined years of suspicious financial activity connected to Callahan, hinting at deeper investigations still underway, enough to plant serious doubt in public perception without revealing every detail from my father's evidence. "It's working," Nora reported, monitoring public reaction across various platforms. "People are questioning Callahan's victim narrative already. His own past reputation is working against him now." Relief settled over the room, though I understood this was far from over. Callahan remained free, embarrassed, and increasingly desperate, which likely made him more dangerous rather than less. Cornered animals, after all, tended to fight hardest when they had nothing left to lose. 3 days later, everything came to a head. Vivian published her complete investigation, every piece of evidence from my father's carefully gathered records, now public knowledge, undeniable and thoroughly verified. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Formal investigations opened within hours, business partners distanced themselves rapidly, and by evening, authorities had identified Callahan's likely hiding locations based on financial transactions suddenly forced into visibility. I stood beside Damon in the operations center, watching news coverage unfold in real time. Years of careful corruption finally collapsing beneath the weight of truth my father had sacrificed everything to preserve. "They found him," Elliot announced, rushing into the room with news that made the entire space fall silent. "Callahan was arrested 20 minutes ago, attempting to leave the country through a private airfield." The relief that flooded through me was overwhelming, tears finally breaking free after days of suppressed emotion and constant danger. Leo pulled me into a tight embrace, both of us finally allowing ourselves to fully process everything we had endured since that single moment when my hand struck Damon's face in front of an entire room. "It's over," I whispered, still hardly believing the words even as I spoke them. "For Callahan." "Yes," Damon said, stepping closer. "But this isn't the end of everything, not for us." I looked up at him, understanding the deeper meaning behind his words. The danger that had brought us together might have passed, but whatever connection had formed between us throughout this impossible journey remained, undeniable and real, despite everything that had led to its creation. Weeks later, standing once again in the same hall where this entire story began, I watched Damon address the very people who had witnessed our first, chaotic encounter. This time, there was no fear in the room, no tension waiting to erupt into violence. Instead, there was quiet respect, a recognition that everything had changed since that single, unexpected slap had set impossible events into motion. "Many of you witnessed something extraordinary here weeks ago," Damon said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "A woman struck me in front of everyone, and instead of destroying her for it, I chose to listen. That choice led us to uncover corruption that has haunted this city for years, and it led me to understand something I had forgotten for far too long. Courage and honesty matter more than fear and control." He turned to look at me then, standing near the edge of the crowd, exactly where I had stood weeks earlier, though everything about how people looked at me now had transformed completely. "Claire Whitmore is no longer someone this organization overlooks or underestimates," Damon continued. "She stands beside me now, not as someone to be protected from this world, but as someone who helped reshape it for the better." The room remained silent for a long moment, before scattered applause began, growing steadily until it filled the entire hall, a stark contrast to the shocked silence that had followed my slap weeks before. I felt tears threatening again, overwhelmed by how completely my life had transformed since that single moment of grief-driven fury. Damon crossed the room toward me, taking my hand gently in front of everyone watching, no longer concerned with maintaining any pretense or distance between us. "Thank you," he said quietly, meant only for me, despite the crowd surrounding us. "For everything you sacrificed to see this through, and for reminding me what genuine courage looks like." "Thank you for trusting me," I replied, "when everyone expected you to destroy me instead." As the room settled into quiet conversation around us, celebrating an ending that once seemed impossible, I understood finally that my father's sacrifice had not been in vain. The truth he died protecting had finally reshaped the world he left behind, and somewhere in that transformation, I had found something I never expected, a future built not on fear, but on courage, honesty, and an unlikely connection forged in the aftermath of a single, unforgettable slap.